All right, my name is Amalina Kamal, and I'll be moderating this particular session. So, when it comes to literature or the written art, right, the written form, it's literally like a vessel of the particular author's thoughts, right? And when it comes to the delivery, it's entirely up to the author himself. And Cursed Bunny is one of its kind, right? So here I have with me is Bora, of course. She is born in Seoul, Korea in 1976, graduated from Yonsei University in Korea itself, and then proceeded to receive her master's in Russian and East European Studies at Yale, Yale University, the US of A, and then also went on to take a PhD in Slavic languages and literatures at Indiana University, Bloomington, USA. So, impressive, right? And Anton, translator, if I can say a true wordsmith in terms of presenting the works of Bora in Cursed Bunny. He's also a double longlist and shortlisted for the 2022 International Booker Prize as the translator, not only just for Cursed Bunny, but as well as Sang Young Park's Love in the Big City. So those are two big accomplishments as a translator, right? Right. Right off the bat, I would like to understand, why did you present the stories inside Cursed Bunny as anthologies, as opposed to having it presented in books, like for its entirety, writing the stories one by one? Why having it presented in shorts, Bora? And these stories are pretty distinct, far apart from each other, right?
They are. You have to understand, Amalina and I have an agreement that whatever she asks me, I'm going to stare at Anton. You have the answer, Anton.
Well, Korea has a stronger tradition of short stories than full-length novels.
I can stare at Anton.
So Bora came up through the internet, basically, as a writer. She does not have a conventional path to authorship, what Koreans consider. So she's not part of the Korean literary establishment because she came up through the internet, and the internet has a lot of, there's this one particular magazine called Mirror, and they do short stories. And so Bora would write short stories and publish them there. And so when she had like a whole bunch and she had readers, the publisher, the Korean publisher for Cursed Bunny, they commissioned a short story collection from her. So Bora sent them like, how many? Like 100? Yeah, 100-something short stories to them, and they picked the stories and they created this book called Cursed Bunny out of her short stories.
I did write novels.
Yes.
I wrote novels before Cursed Bunny.
3 novels, right?
2 before Cursed Bunny, 1 after Cursed Bunny, I think. Yeah, but I guess he didn't pick them, so they're not very good.
No, I think they're great.
Okay, but for the stories inside, they have some elements of like Lovecraft kind of like storytelling. And this is quite impressive for me, especially. And for Cursed Bunny, especially for the English version, it started out with this particular story entitled The Head. Why so? Maybe, as context, you can explain briefly what the premise of The Head is about, and then why beginning the book with that story.
Oh, so the story called The Head is about this woman who finds a head in her toilet, and the head is alive, it talks, it's very misshapen, and it calls her mother. So she's like, I'm not your mother. And the head is like, no, you are my mother. I was made from parts of you and bits of you. And so, and the head keeps haunting her, like whenever she goes to the bathroom, like there's a head in the toilet being like, hi mom. And so eventually something happens by the end of the story. This was the first short story that I read of Bora. So in my translator selfishness, I wanted the reader, the English reader, to have my experience of having this as their first Bora Chung experience. It's also the first story that Bora published, yeah.
The first thing that I wrote.
But for the Korean version, it was Cursed Bunny itself,
Yeah,
right?
the title story was
Yeah.
in the very beginning.
Yeah. Was the consideration also because of English readers having to like things that are very attentive even from the first reading, right? From the first paragraph. Is it because of that as well? Like,
Oh yeah, I think English is a very, it's a top-heavy language. The subject comes and then the verb. So all the important parts in the English language come in the beginning. So this makes the English language really great for if you need to scan something, like it's great for instruction manuals, for example, because you can skim through an instruction manual very quickly. In Korean, the language, the verb comes at the end, kind of like German, I guess. And so you have to kind of wait until the end of the sentence to see what the sentence is about. So Korean language has built-in suspense, whereas English kind of like gives it away at the beginning.
interesting. So when it comes to translation, I suppose this is something that we can take into consideration as well. But I think it applies in other formats, right? So when it comes to popular TV series, Korean K-dramas also have like hundreds of episodes sometimes, just to get to that particular climax. But were there anything or within the stories that you need to cut off to present in English?
No. So there's this very famous Korean actress named Chun Do-yeon, and she did an interview. I get a lot of inspiration from actresses, so I always like read by women actors particularly, and I read a lot of their interviews. And she said something really interesting. She said, someone asked her, what happens if you get a script and there's like a line that's really weird and awkward for you to pronounce or perform? And she goes, oh, those are my favorite lines. I love like making them my own. I love it, like the more awkward and the more weird the line, the better, because it's more of a challenge for me, for an actor. And I found that very inspiring as a translator. You know, so
it was awkward?
No, not at all. Not at all. But if there are elements of it that, you know, like the English publisher, because it was awkward. Because I felt like, yeah, it was awkward. No, it's the thing about the sentences in this particular book is that they contradict themselves. So it's a very funny sentence, like it's talking about something very funny, but it says it in a very horrific way, or the other way around. It's a very horrific situation, but she says it in a really funny way. There are two stories. Like the head is kind of like a funny situation that's told in a horrific way, and the embodiment is like a horrific story, but it's told in a very funny way. And so I really like that contradiction, and that kind of like challenged me as a translator. It's like, oh, I want to see if this will work in English.
Right. Okay, before we go into, I want to pick your brain a bit in terms of like how did you even come up with all these stories? But just to wrap this up, translation-wise, right? So do you think this is one of the toughest translation works for you?
I don't think so. I think it was just, it
was
like a dream.
Looking at you intently right now.
No, it was like, people ask me that, and it was like a dream. Like I always say, like, oh, when I was translating this, it just lended itself to translation so well. I think it's because Bora is so cosmopolitan. You know, she spent a lot of time overseas, and she reads a lot of like Slavic literature and, you know, translations, and she's a translator herself. So her sensibility when she writes, she's not a Korean author, she's an international author with international cosmopolitan sensibilities. And that's why her work lends itself so well to translators. I'm sure any translator, it's been translated to Indonesian and Polish, and like any translator you ask, they'd probably say the same thing.
Okay. Well, congrats on that, Bora.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a note to myself that my sentences are awkward.
Yeah, don't overthink. No, we love you actually. We love you for who you are. Because without you, there won't be the stories, right? Okay, so Cursed Bunny blurs the lines between, you know, all the genres like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, grotesque. I mean, it's like everything in one. I just want to know if you could take yourself back to when you first write The Head, right? That you said that was the first story from this. Where were you at that particular time? What headspace were you in? Yeah.
I was in college, and my college has a literary contest, and they have a cash prize of $1,000. So I wanted the money. I wrote it for the money.
Okay. Purely, period. Okay. It's okay. Own it. But seeing that, you know, this particular short story, it mediates very heavy topics like patriarchism as well as like capitalism and some of the other shorts, right? So were there any like events at that time that resonated or transpired across in these short stories? And then maybe if you can highlight which among them.
Well, the stories span from 1998 to 2016, so I can't really pinpoint one event. There were so many of them. In the middle of that time period, I went to the U.S. and I found out much later that in 2003-2004 there was this garbage dumpling scandal. So there was a small company that made dumplings and it was doing very well, and the big companies wanted the market share, so they launched a smear campaign against the company. So that's why it's called the garbage dumpling. All the media outlets were reporting that this company was doing really well and actually sold garbage, actually stuffed their dumplings with garbage, unedible stuff. And there was even a government investigation. And in the middle of the government investigation, the owner of the company took his own life. And I was in the US and I didn't have time to investigate all this, and so I only saw the headlines in Korean, and I thought the owner did something wrong. And then I came back, and about 10, 12 years later, I read an interview with the owner's son, and at that point, it was all resolved that this guy did nothing wrong. This guy did nothing wrong. He was making good food, but it was a small company. They didn't have the money to market themselves as strongly as all the big chaebol companies were. And the chaebol companies wanted that itty-bitty little market share, and they killed the guy, essentially. And the media helped them, and nobody took responsibility. So I got really angry, and that's why I wrote her study. I wanted them to all die.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing. I have to like follow a bit because it is very real, right? It's like a reality slap of sorts. But when you were writing it, did you hope to kind of tell like a moral of the story behind it, right? Because I mean, we had a conversation about 2 nights ago during the dinner about how you're very in tune with the socio-political climate of your surrounding. And you mentioned something about, you know, the ferry incident in Korea.
That was after the ferry disaster. Until then, I wasn't really actively in this scene, and I didn't have a message. I was just really angry, and I wanted the chaebol people to die. And but then the ferry sank, and I was a university lecturer at that point, so I couldn't really go into my classroom and look at my students in the eye because they all looked like the students who couldn't get out of the boat. So so in order to save my own self and save my own mentality, I went to the square and I participated in gathering signatures for the petition to make a special law to investigate this thing. And there was, because I speak English and other languages, I mostly talked to the non-Koreans, and under the blazing sun in July of 2014, this is what I told you, there were so many people there, the whole world came and they all signed the petition for us, and there was this Malaysian couple. And so I was trying to tell the lady that the ferry sank and there were high school students and stuff, and she cut me off and said, "Our plane crashed, we know."
And page 17, just to remind you guys, yeah.
And back then I didn't really know what was going on, but I looked it up, and it was 3 days after the plane crashed, and by Russians, no less. And back then, Koreans themselves were against the investigation. There were people who were bad-mouthing the victims, saying they were on a on their way to a school trip, they were on their way to have fun, and then they had an accident and they died. Why do we have to spend government money to investigate this thing? Those kind of things. And there's this, people who are not Koreans came to me and they said, we know, and I really needed that we know, you know? And it was one of those moments that I will keep in my heart for the rest of my life, the we know. And I am very grateful. I am very thankful for it. I hope Norwegian people.
It's very moving. And I thought that you should be sharing with our audience here.
Thank you.
Yeah, but what I wanted to kind of like, how I want to tie your particular experience to this book is that, you know, when it comes to matters of such, you present it in news, it's a bit, like it's easy for us to just disregard because, you know, oh, this news is not my cup of tea. But when it's presented in literature, right, and also in this way, the very weird kind of gore, Lovecraft presentation, I suppose you could find relatability, irrespective of, as a reader, where you're from, right? So it's easily digested. I suppose the messages, no?
The book didn't sell in Korea for 5 years. And then he found the book and he translated it, and then he got rejected so many times.
But okay, irrespective, if there's no struggles, then probably, I mean, when you look back, you wouldn't feel the success that you feel right now, right? And this particular one actually got recognized in the 2022 International Booker Prize. It's shortlisted. So first of all, let's just give one big hand there. It's for a foreign work, right, on that platform, right? So how significant is this sort of recognition to you as an author and yourself as a translator? And your name is on the cover, right? So this is something very important. Publisher releasing. Yeah. So Bora or Anton, let's start with you first.
Yeah, it was an incredible moment. So to give you some background, like Bora said, it actually sold to the first publisher I showed it to. First UK publisher, which was on First Star, but like a few American publishers, when I tried to get when I tried to sell American rights for it, like rejected it. Before eventually, Bora's wonderful agent, it's Green Book, they managed to sell it to Algonquin. A lot, I think on First Star also did that sale. By then I'd stepped back, so I don't know who did it. But yeah, so it was wonderful. When I went to LTI Korea to get a grant for it. So in Korea we have this institution which funds literary translation, which subsidizes it, and they give you a range of the grant from 8 million won to 14 million won. And they gave this book 8 million won. They gave it like the least amount of money that they can give it.
8 million won? How's that translated?
No, it's like $6,000 or something like that.
In American,
yeah.
in USD, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
And I was like, okay, that, I can't. So I was so angry. I was just so incredibly angry at LTI Korea. And so we applied for a Penheim grant to make up for the shortfall. And then I was like, you know, it's a very prestigious grant that only like, I don't know, like 8 to 10 books get every year. And I was like, oh, we have to win a Penheim, otherwise like financially this book's not gonna make any sense. And then we won. And then that's when that Penheim was when I was like, oh, we have a winner in our hand. Like we could do something with this book. That's when I realized it. And when it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, I had been working for LTI Korea for like over 10 years. I CC'd every single email address I had. Every single LTI Korea email address I had and said, hey, we got longlisted for the Booker Prize. Please congratulate me. I was very drunk. I was very drunk, and the next morning I woke up and I was like, did I do that? And my husband was like, yeah, you did that. And then I opened my email and oh, they actually did congratulate me.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah, that felt so great. So it was really, really important because like they were like, you know, it's a genre work. It's not mainstream.
Bora did not come through the mainstream system as an author, so she's kind of like an outsider in Korea as well, as a writer. And so like no one, and you know, there were 2 books longlisted, and the Korean press thought that Love in the Big City would be shortlisted and not Chris Bunny, because Sang-Hyun Park is, you know, he's a bestseller, he went through the mainstream system and whatnot. But like the foreign press were betting on Chris Bunny. So I thought that was like a really interesting kind of discrepancy. And of course, it happened the way it happened.
Yeah. And I'm glad that it happened the way it happened because you were here today with us at GTLF. All right, so Bora, I want to go back to you. Like we know that the book is inspired by Russian and Slavic fairy tales. Like, but isn't Korean folklore or fairy tales good enough?
Well, I was a university lecturer for 12 years, so whenever somebody asks me a substantial question like that, I go to like lecture mode. So in the Korean dynasty, so up until like the Three Kingdoms and then the Korea, when Buddhism was the mainstream philosophy, they didn't censor folklore that much. But when Confucianism came into Korea, they wanted to change the entire hierarchy of the society. So they started to censor folklore as they were recording folklore. So most of the folktale and fairy tales that we have in Korea are somehow very didactic. It has a lesson in the end, and a very Confucianist lesson, like respect your father.
It's rigged,
as opposed to your mother. Respect your father, respect the king. You know, we don't have the king anymore, but respect whoever has the power, and do not ever speak ill of them. And no, I'm not going out to the street and protest. They are, some of them are really good, some of them are really scary, some of them are really creative, but you have to dig them up. Otherwise, the most popular ones, the most well-known ones are very didactic and they're not fun. And I like urban legends because they don't have a lesson, they feel closer to our own lives, and they're more modern, so we can find scary stuff from urban legends that are close to home. Yeah, Korean folktale, they used to be okay, but they suck.
Even today?
Yeah, the more well-known ones. Right. Now that I'm an adult, I know where to find the real original folktale, and they're fascinating, but the ones that were taught to me as a child, they were just boring.
And I suppose it's kind of a reflection of like how we are as readers, right? We want variety. We know from the get-go if something is like structured or scripted. So I suppose for you, your source of inspiration, you turn towards the Russian and Slavic influences is because it's much more free?
Because Russians, I guess, like Europeans, ignore their folklore because it was not high culture, and they started recording it, writing them down, and only in the 19th century. So about 2,000 years or more, their folklore was free. They could like tell their children and tell each other stories that were just stories, and without the censorship of the church or the government powers or whatever. So they're really gory stories and really fascinating magical stories that are preserved in that form.
Right. And this just came up, like now that you've expressed that, right? Are there any plans in your future to kind of like rewrite, or not rewrite, but tell those Korean folk tales true to what its original content is or its origin? But do you fear like censorship coming from the administrative part, right?
Yeah, I think I'm too used to, because I first met them as a child, the way they were told to me. So they were taught to me, not told to me. So I learned them as a child the way they are now. So I don't think I can rewrite them or rediscover them. It would take a lot of time and energy because I know them in a certain form, and it was taught to me that that is the correct form, you know. So I would feel like I'm doing some damage to the original when the original was already censored.
Right. Right. I understand. It's very, like, you have to actually like properly process and think things through before you start doing it. It's not a simple task, basically. Okay, going back to Cursed Bunny, right? So in those Slavic and Russian fairy tales, what was one that you used predominantly for the book?
Slavic fairy tales. Specifically, I don't know. I can't really pinpoint one story. I guess a lot of people comment about Google's nose. It's about a story where a guy loses his nose. He just wakes up in the morning and there's this flat space where his nose used to be, and then he goes out to the street and there is his nose wearing a uniform that is of higher rank than he himself is. How does a nose wear a uniform? But whatever. So that's how the story goes. And I can't really say there is a direct influence, like you can pinpoint one story to my story, but I would say, do we have time? Yeah, I would say I found freedom in that form. It's canonical Russian literature that you learn in school. People write academic papers about the writer and the stories like that, and that is something worth telling. That is a worthwhile story, and it's high literature, and you can write fantastic, imaginary, creative stories that way and still be good literature. That's what I learned.
Okay. But is Korean literature that complicated or less complicated?
In Korea, there's a dichotomy between high literature and genre literature. So Anton said you have to go through a certain system. You have to win a contest, basically, to enter the world of high literature. Whereas for genre literature, you just write a good story and you find a publisher. Or you just, after the age of the internet, you just write a good story and publish something on the internet. And readers will find you. So I guess genre literature is seen as more democratic, and the real hot, what they call pure literature, is more conservative. And pure literature in Korea is very reluctant to deal with imaginary, fantastic stuff. They want realism, and I don't like reality. I don't like reality at all. So I went through the genre literature scene, and very recently we started having an upsurge of interest in Korean science fiction and fantastic literature partly because of the pandemic, because Netflix and all the similar services want content, and everybody's stuck at home, so there's enormous demand. And then Cursed Bunny got shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and all of a sudden, all the Korean media want to interview me. They want me to talk about Korean science fiction. And I am currently I'm serving as the president of the Science Fiction Writers Union of Korea. Yay!
What a feat!
So it just coincided that way. I became the president last winter. So I was really agonizing over what I could do as the president, but this happened, so I said okay to all the interviews to shout Science Fiction Writers Union of Korea, science fiction in Korea.
Yes.
Korean science fiction is the best, and it's kind of working. I did so many.
Breaking the glass ceiling.
Yeah. No, I did so many interviews that I think people are slowly getting brainwashed that Korean science fiction is actually good, which is true. I'm not telling a lie.
I mean, you don't have to upsell about Korean science fiction or pop culture here in Malaysia, because like Malaysians love all things Korean.
Malaysians have taste.
Guys, we gotta give them more free stays, extend their trip. No, come, retake them. We love you.
One of the interviews that Bora did, she did this interview for this mainstream newspaper in Korea. And when I saw the headline for the interview, I just like almost threw up. It was like unknown writer shortlisted for Booker Prize. They called Bora unknown writer.
I was unknown.
You were the president of the science fiction writers union in Korea. Yes. Yeah. The kind of interviews that, like, I also interviewed a lot because I wanted to promote, that I wanted to show translators, being very on stage and being very visual, and because translators are always being like pushed into the shadows. And so I would do these interviews, and like the whole idea behind like they would ask me like, so how did you discover Bora? Because she's so unknown and obscure. And I'd be like, oh my god.
I just sell books.
Yeah.
No, because it's interesting, the reason for my question is because I'm a media practitioner myself, and if it's something close to Malaysians, like Malaysian making things like abroad, it's like, oh, celebrate them, right? So, but for the narrative on that side is like quite interesting. Is it because there is a lack of confidence with local talents back in home?
Oh yeah, there's like, I feel like there's more internalized white supremacy in Korea than outside of it, almost. Because, so I'm the most visible Korean literary translator now, but just a couple of years ago, I couldn't get a job to save my life. Like, no one would give me a book to translate. So Cursed Bunny and Love in the Big City, the two books that I was longlisted for, they came about because I went out and looked for a book to translate. And I talked to the authors, I talked to their Korean publishers and got the rights for them. I figured out how to sell them overseas to overseas publishers using my connections. And so I sold Love in the Big City to Tilted Axis Press because I knew Deborah, and so I could pitch the book to her. I sold Cursed Bunny to On First Star because I had a previous book with On First Star, so I knew them. So I had to do all of that, and I had to, convince the Korean publishers as well. Like, I'm not some weird guy that walked off the street, although literally in Bora's case, I literally was someone who walked off the street and asked her for. Because we were at a book fair at the time. I was like, oh, can I translate your book? And she's like, who are you?
She was. I said yes because I thought you can translate away. Nobody's gonna publish it.
Just like whatever. Yeah. So for me, it was really, really, that it was really important for me to like.
Okay, just a little bit of understanding here. Like, how did this happen? Again, like, you guys know each other since young, and then you connected. I mean, who are you?
So it's.
What was the decision maker in terms of collaborating, and how far has this synergy extended, like beyond the friend?
It was 2018. I think fall of 2018, there was a book fair in Seoul, and I went to. So Cursed Bunny was published by one of the then very small science fiction specializing publishing houses. So I went to their booth and I was selling books for them because all the authors were my friends and colleagues, science fiction writers. So I wanted to sell their books. And this guy comes up, and I was trying to sell him books, and he picked up my book, and I didn't really know what to say, so I shut up. And that's why he looked into my book, and he actually read it. And he told me later that was the first time he saw my book, and I thought, okay, whatever. And he introduced himself, and he said, I'm a translator, I want to meet the author or the publisher of this book, and he said it in perfect normal Korean, and I didn't understand it, and I said, oh, I'm a translator too. There was this very non-conversation going on, but anyways, so I said okay, and the publisher later said okay, and then later I saw him at a protest, and I knew he was going there because I was on Twitter. So I knew it, but he didn't know. And I found Anton, and I was like, Anton! And then I marched away. And I think that's when he actually started to trust me.
I trusted you before that. It was just really funny though, because it was for Soul Pride. And so my husband and I are like standing, like, we're in the parade, and then Bora comes to us, hi, and then she goes away, and then my husband's like, what's that? And I was like, oh, that's Bora Chung. And he's like, oh, she's so cheerful.
The most cheerful you were.
Yeah, I like words.
Okay. I mean, okay, going back to the cover, I mean, looking at the cover itself, it screams danger, but not in a way that is scary. It's like more intriguing, right? But Bora, or Anton actually shared to me, the original illustration is more liked by the duo right here, because it screams psychotic. But this illustration is actually done by Koreans and stuff, right? Maybe you want to give to the audience, like, when you're working with this publisher, to what extent they want that Korean essence in it as well.
So like Onward Star has this policy where all of their books, so they specialize in translations from Asia. So they have this policy where all of their books have to be designed by a designer from the source language. So if they have a Taiwanese translation, then they find a publisher in Taiwan. A designer in Taiwan, yeah. And so what they end up with is extremely beautiful covers. Like Onward Star covers are incredible. Like this cover, like, you know, when we saw it, we were like, we went gaga. And because of this cover, I feel like this book is also like, part of why it did so well is because of this very cover, because Instagrammers love this cover. And they put it like, even like if they saw it, they're like, oh, this is gonna look really good. And so they would take photos of it, and like I would search for Cursed Bunny, and every single, like, you know, Bookstagram, I love Bookstagram, I love BookTube. All of the book bloggers and book critics would comment on the cover. So yeah, and it has a great story behind it, because like, oh, it's a Korean artist, and so like, yeah, so we're very happy with the cover.
Okay, so we're going to go off the script a bit, but I just want you to pick one short story that you can just give a brief as for summary of to the audience, and then we go into whether or not it's meant for younger readers.
At the Booker event, 3 of the jury members came to me separately. They didn't plan it, they just approached me, and they all told me they read it to their children. Their children are terrified. And they look so happy, like, my children are so terrified of your story. Why did you read that to your children?
Because like one review that I managed to get online by this particular YouTuber who is quite, I mean, he loves you. Or later I'll share you the channel. But he says, Cursed Bunny is disgusting and visceral and nasty and brutal, yucky, but yummy, and ugly, but yet pretty. It's like everything, you know? And it's like,
just don't tell me he read it to his children.
I don't think this person. Yeah, but no, anyway. So I suppose you do not agree with the statement of like children can read the book.
But you know, it's already happened.
I mean, okay. Well, in modern society itself, right? Like, kids are already open to things that are not necessarily PG-13.
I don't care what the modern society is doing.
Yeah.
I don't want to do damage to the younger generation. I don't want to be the one doing them damage. But in Korea, I went to all these book festivals, and like middle school teachers come to me with their students, and they all read it in class, and they're like, why are you doing this to your students? They're 14 years old. You should not be doing this to your students. And they were like so happy.
But sometimes I feel like what you get on social media is even scarier. Because at least with this, you do, I mean, I suppose the storytelling, you put a little bit more thought into it. With social media, there's a lot more unethicalism in that sense, right? So, I don't know.
There is a framing effect, and there is a, it helps to emotionally process it better, I guess, because it's contained within a framework.
And then now you've translated it, and you make sure that it's like presented well enough. Okay.
I mean, I make sure that there are no typos. I don't go out of my way to not traumatize the reading audience, because I don't think it's that kind of book. It doesn't like pass on trauma, or as too empathic for that.
It actually does talk about trauma, but not in a very direct way. It's like you revisit the story, and you kind of like take parts of the storytelling and apply it to your own realities, right? I think one is on about the girl having issues with her period. Yeah, so for that, it's quite interesting to me as well. So have you found yours?
Yeah, I actually do like that story. For me personally, I mean, it changes every time, but as time goes by, like I keep thinking about the embodiment, because when I was translating this story, I was doing it as part of the Penheim application, and so it had to be really, really good because they only pick so many books for Penheim. And I remember doing embodiment, and then I was editing it at the end, and by the time I finished editing it, I was like, oh my god, this is actually really good. I was like, I know I did this, but wow, this is really good. It's like, if you read The Meaning of Mariah Carey by Mariah Carey, she describes when she was recording the Emancipation of Mimi album, like she came up with the song Fly Like a Bird like in a night. And then she when she's replaying the song after she finished producing it, and the sun is rising like outside the studio, and she's looking at it and she's like, and she says something like, I felt the hand of God touch my song and touch my hand, and that's how I felt when I finished the embodiment. And I was like, I know I need to win a Penheim with this sample, but you know what, I don't care if I don't, I don't care if it never gets published. Like this is I just had this amazing experience, and no one will be able to tell me anything about translation ever again for the rest of my life. So that was this story, the embodiment, yeah.
Oh my god. But I love you as a translator. I'm probably gonna let's collaborate more. I like your energy. Anyway, so going back to the story itself, Chris Bunny, do you think do you think without your experiences in terms of like the Eastern European studies and Russian studies and Slavic literatures, do you think the storytelling would be the same?
Some of them maybe. Like Goodbye My Love, the only one science fiction robot story I think that was probably influenced by Russian science fiction, Russian and Eastern European science fiction. So maybe, I don't know, my sentences would be different because learning Russian and Polish forever ruined my sense of grammar.
Because you've translated words, right?
Yes,
from original language to English.
Yeah, I translate and I taught Russian and Polish. I taught Polish to American kids in the US. Me. Korean. They hired a Korean person to teach Polish. You can imagine that. So, yeah, so like, when I write in Korean, I think about the grammar in terms of Polish and Russian grammar, and that makes my Korean sentences really weird. And my editors hate it, but I guess Anton likes it, so it's okay.
Okay, so I mean, both of you are translators yourself as well, but writers. So what is one thing that translators should consider when translating the work of another individual, right? Like, do you have to stay true to its original form in a sense whereby, like for instance, you mentioned Bora is quite funny in her writing, but we know with jokes, sometimes if you translate it, the punchline needs to be there and the retelling of that punchline needs to be proper, right? So I don't know what methods helped you in your translation works, especially when it comes to fiction stuff.
Well, we did cover this like with our panel with like Daisy Rockwell, and I like her answer better than mine. But basically, like I think it's very important not to have that dichotomy between, oh, am I faithful or do I do a beautiful but faithless translation? Like that binary doesn't exist. That's a false binary. The best translation is, for me, the most beautiful translation is often you have to look back at what the source language is doing. For example, like Bora, I know she's told me that she gets a lot of flack for the way her sentences sound in Korean, but that's why I like her sentences. That's why I like how contradictory they are. Like we use the word awkward, but when we say awkward, we don't mean like awkward. We mean like things are not smoothed out so much, sanded over. They're not like, over polished sentences. They're very energetic and they're very kind of like, they have a texture to them that I really like. And that's what that kind of almost roughness that comes from the energy is what I want to convey for her. I mean, there are authors who have extremely smooth language, like one of the authors that I translate is Kyung-Suk Shin. They have copies of Violets being sold in the bookstore down here. And she has a very beautiful, polished, hypnotic style that very astonishingly translates very well into English, because I wouldn't have thought that it was possible, but when I did it, I was like, oh wow, it actually kind of works. And so, with Bora, it's very refreshing. Like it's shocking, but like in a very like refreshing way.
How long did it took you to finish the whole book?
Like 2 months, like
2 months.
very short time. Yeah.
Because these are different stories. I mean, short stories, of course, but it's different, right? I thought it would be like longer than that. Okay. All right, Bora. With the stories that we are presenting here, right? It's very intriguing, but very scary at the same time. I just wonder, like, what do you do on your free time?
I zone out and daydream.
Because I'm wondering, like, where is your source of inspiration, aside from us talking about the social realities, the socio-political kind of like settings sometimes, and then of past, present, and possible future, right? So I was just wondering, the creative aspect, does it come from somewhere? How do you tap into that?
The creative inspiration, I guess, comes from, I don't know, my lust and anger. I want the bad people to die and the people to be happy. Bad people to die, yeah, that's a very strong motivation.
Right.
And so when I wrote The Head for the contest to win the money, my lust for money, I wrote the first page. Always wanted to write a story about a bathroom, so I set the story in the bathroom and I started writing, and I tried to be as realistic as possible, because back then I was taught that is real literature, that you have to be like reflecting life and stuff. So I made my protagonist have like real shock and horror towards the head coming from the toilet and stuff, and I showed it to my sister and she said, this is boring. So I scratched it and I went to the other direction, so the protagonist is not surprised at all. She acts as though it's normal for heads to come out of the toilet, and that actually opened up a wider door towards a much better story. So that's what I tried to do. I always try to imagine things going the opposite way of logic.
Very dystopian. Like
yes. And this Kazakh filmmaker, Timur, what was his name? I can't remember his name. He's the director of Night Watch and Salt. And he says something similar when he makes movies. He said he considers what laws of physics he can break. And I think that's a really good idea, to consider what logic or laws of physics or laws of the world you can break.
Okay. And for the both of you both returned to Korea, right? Now you're residing there. So what's the decision behind like basing yourself as writers, translators, that it's for the fight that you want to fight, fighting the good fight?
Yeah, and I have legal right in Korea to protest. I don't have in other countries.
I feel like that question would make more sense if I was anywhere else other than Korea. Like, why are you here? Because I'm in Korea because I'm a Korean citizen. I spent 30 years in Korea. My entire family is in Korea. No branch of my family immigrated or lives outside of Korea. So I'm like thoroughly Korean. I served in the military in Korea. You know, BTS is going to the military. Like I did that. Yeah, I have a Korean law degree. So I'm very Korean. That's why I'm Korean.
Okay, a little bit of context. No, because it's interesting because like for a lot of Malaysians, they find opportunities outside and they just base there and just live there. But for you, with whatever you shared earlier, right, the pragmatic approach of like Korean literature, sometimes even the space is quite rigid. But you still went back. You still went back, and I mean, irrespective of what the situation is, but you're there trying to make a mark. So you wanted to find your source of like motivation for being. I mean, Koreans yourself, and then just wanting to be there, probably develop the ecosystem better in the future.
I mean, I went to high school in Thailand, and if I had a choice, I would live there for the rest of my life, but they don't want me. So So apparently when I turn 50, I can get a retirement visa in Thailand. So I kind of plan on doing that. But then I met my husband. He's Thai. So I'm like, ooh, you're Thai. Because we met in Korea. There are not a lot of Thai kids lying around in Korea. So we met in Korea. He's speaking English. He's like, oh, I'm American. I'm like, oh yeah, you're American. Good for you. And then he's like, oh, but I'm also Thai. I'm like, ooh, you're Thai. That means you can own property in Thailand. So, you got a boyfriend, money bags?
Okay. But well, we're almost at the end of the session, but I just want to open questions to the floor. I'm sure we have fans here. Great. Okay. Can we get a mic to this lovely lady right front? Come. Introduce yourself and then you can
Hello. My name is Daphne. I'm consulting editor at Scholastic Asia. So this question, we publish a lot of Southeast Asian books in English, and when I try to speak to my Korean colleagues about maybe translating them into Korean, what they tell me is that Koreans aren't interested in reading Southeast Asian lit. That they're only interested in either white authors or Korean authors. Would you like to comment on that?
I told you Malaysians have taste Korean still. I'm so very sorry.
I mean, I grew up in Southeast Asia and Korea, so I can definitively tell you that Southeast Asia has better taste.
No, you have to have someone. You have to understand, like with translation, it's such a. I can't describe to you all the work that I do as a translator that has nothing to do with the act of translation. People are always asking me, how do you translate this sentence? Like, how do you learn grammar? Like, I don't do any of that. Like, translating as part of my job as a literary translator is like 20%, 30%. The rest, the 70%, 80% is writing emails. It's going to like events, it's networking, it's trying to convince publishers overseas that this property is really good, and calling manuscripts property. This property is really good, and this is what this book is about, and you'll love it. It's kind of like this book that you've published and that book you've published, and contextualizing it. Being on social media and promoting your authors and promoting Korean literature. There is so much work that is around translation that's kind of subsumed it, that you need someone who is willing to do all of that work for that literature. And that person, by the way, has to understand the source material at a very visceral level and be able to understand the traditions of the target language and what is being published and understand the market. That's why there's so few of us. There are exactly 3 full-time Korean to English literary translators in the entire world, not in Korea. In the entire world, they are Anton Hur, Sora Kim Russell, and Janet Hong. I can name them, I can count them in one hand. That's because we 3 are literally the only people in the world who can do this job between these 2 languages, because we're the only ones who have the necessary experience for that. So it's very difficult to find someone like that, and we haven't found, that person hasn't appeared yet. But the thing about Koreans is that we're very faddish and trendy. We like things that are
We're very racist.
Yeah. So if there's a sudden if there's a sudden Thai trend, then everyone is going to want to read Thai books all of a sudden. When I went back to Korea in the year 2000 after graduating from Bangkok, there were 3 Thai restaurants in all of Seoul. Now there are 700. There are 5 in my neighborhood alone. It's great. So once Koreans get on something, they get on it very quickly. But it's that matter of finding that one person who's willing to do all of that legwork to do that.
Not in my lifetime.
We never know.
The institution of literary agencies just appeared about 4 or 5 years ago in Korea, and we have the staggering number of 2 literary agencies in all of Korea, 2. And one is more of a talent scout for TV, and they recruit singers and actors, and they do this writers. they represent writers on the side, but the other one, my agency, is a very small agency, but they actually do deal in the copyright world, and they are actually willing to import good literature into Korea. So there is an agency, but like one single agency will not enlighten the entire Korean populace. So I don't know, maybe not in my lifetime. I don't know.
I mean, Koreans love visiting Southeast Asia. Koreans
suck.
Yeah. Koreans love, like, for example, Thai horror films, and Koreans like, there is potential there. We just need that tipping point.
So it's just an open dialogue, basically. If there's a Korean delegates here, it's not necessarily.
Oh, they don't have the taste to be here.
Yeah.
Is there anyone Korean here? No.
Another microphone. I think everyone can hear. Okay. I'm very curious about where you're coming from and how you, with what kind of humor or where you get this. I mean, I understand that you study literature, so it's a Russian, and then there was a surrealism. I mean, in Europe there was quite long ago there was this macabre and this kind of like saying the nose, or even Kafka is also in this vision. But then on the other side, I mean, I wonder, from Korea coming a lot of very, very extreme things like the Parasite movies, or now the series, the series where the people get dying, and so which is a very, I'm curious, is it something very Korean? I mean, are you tending to identify something with the Korean? Is there something in the Korean where it comes from, or is it coming from Europe and Russia? I mean, I'm not so familiar with Korea, but so many things coming out of Korea, which is so much popular, isn't it?
Koreans are, I think, more forgiving when there's violence on screen. When there's a visual representation of violence on screen, Koreans are more forgiving, and it used to be like really violent in the 80s and 90s. Now we have this, not censorship, but advisory committee that advises not to show like bloody knives on screen and stuff. I think Korea developed, we had the Korean War. There are people who still remember it as their lived experience, who are still alive. And then came the military dictatorship, so we had a lot of violence historically and socially. And when it comes to the macabre, my own macabre is, I think it's mostly from the Polish literature from the 1920s and 30s. They are not macabre, they're just crazy. Poles are just, they regained their freedom, their independence in 1918. So from 1918 to 1939, before the Second World War, it's called the 20 years period between war, and it was the best period of modern Polish history. And they just went crazy for new stuff because they were free. So they were free to do anything and everything. And all these, I talked to another translator about Bruno Schulz. It's just dreamy. Some things are dreamy, nostalgic. Some things are just people are killing each other left and right, and heads are falling from the bodies. And they are just so funny and scary, and nobody's in their right minds. And I love that crazy creativity and that kind of freedom, the entire society shouting that we are free now. That is not coming back soon. That's a one-time experience, so that's very unique, I think. I love it.
Right. Thank you so much. That wraps up today's session. Thank you, both Bora and Anton. Let's give them a round of applause. Yeah. So, but of course, if you do have questions, you can directly go to them. If you've got books, you can ask them to sign. They'll be here. They're very fun people, fun duo. And I hope to see you coming back to Malaysia, probably down to Kuala Lumpur. I'll bring you around. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good remaining of the day. Thank you.